Are we witnessing a different type of coup on the Trump administration with the Signalgate situation? Is President Trump going to break the mainstream media and grind them into the earth? I want to go over this and many other big stories. I have special guest Alex Newman. Alex, thank you for joining me again.
So great to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
So just some background. Alex is an independent journalist and author. He wrote a book called Deep State, The Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. He's also the founder of Liberty Sentinel, a news website that gives incredible, detailed information about what's really going on around the world. Alex, we've got this mistake gate turning into signal gate. What is your thoughts on this? I'm starting to believe that this journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic, was embedded in a top White House cabinet signal chat. I don't believe it was an accident. How did he get in? Why didn't he dismiss himself? Was this to gather information to humiliate Trump or trigger an impeachment? What are your thoughts on the whole Signalgate Jeffrey Goldberg situation?
Well, thank you, Stephen. And I'll start by saying I think this is largely a tempest in a teacup, right? It is a mostly manufactured scandal by the fake media and probably some mole within the Trump administration who's helping out here. And one of the ways that you can try to investigate something like this is by looking at the fallout. What we have seen now is an unhinged effort to take out Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is, in my opinion, one of the best members of this administration. He's a good man. He's an honest man. And we know because of what he was doing before joining the Trump administration. He wasn't part of the swamp. He wasn't part of the establishment. And that absolutely terrifies the deep state. So right now, it's hard to know exactly who might be involved. I know they're blaming a low-level National Security Council staffer. I don't believe that for a second. And a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this, Stephen, but I think Mike Waltz needs to be looked at under a microscope. His wife is involved in the Council on Foreign Relations. She's been involved with the Atlantic Council. She's been involved with the World Economic Forum. Frankly, this is a guy who worked closely with Dick Cheney for a long time. I don't know Waltz personally, but I have a lot of contacts in his district. I know a lot of the people who've been around him over the years. And I'm not sure he's as MAGA as he wants us to believe. And I don't believe some low-level staffer in the National Security Council could have possibly done this. Now, I know he's saying he's good friends with Pete Hegseth, but what we're seeing now is a huge push by the media to oust Pete Hegseth. I think Donald Trump probably learned from the first term that this is the modus operandi of the deep state. You saw how they took out General Flynn like a laser, right? And it seems like so far Donald Trump has been holding firm, and I hope that continues.
I do too. But I do want them to get to the bottom of this. Was he embedded on purpose? Was this a genuine mistake? Is it somebody who has infiltrated, for example, Laura Loomer? I don't want to say any names because these are just allegations, but there is a staffer whose husband was one of the attorneys that put many people from January 6th in prison there in Washington, D.C. So is there a conflict of interest there? How do you be MAGA while your husband's putting MAGA voters in jail? This thing is going to have to ultimately shake out. You know the deep state better than most people. Is the deep state mostly for the military? Is it mostly for big food, big pharma, or is it a conglomerate of all of it trying to have influence or control of the American people?
It's a great description. I would call it a conglomerate of all of the above. And I mentioned the Council on Foreign Relations earlier. I think that should be best understood as like the above ground headquarters of the deep state in the United States of America. It doesn't operate independently. It has a sister organization in the UK called the Royal Institute for International Affairs. They've got the European Council on Foreign Relations. And then there are other groups that kind of revolve around it, like the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberg. But it's a very significant organization. And when you look at the players there, what you'll find is the mega banks are all involved. The big tech companies are all involved. You'll find the CEOs, some of the key academics. both parties, right? Leadership from both parties. We mentioned Dick Cheney. He was a director at the Council on Foreign Relations for a very long time. And then we've got him on camera bragging that he never told the voters back home in Wyoming about his connections to the CFR. And I think that was for very obvious and strategic reasons. The voters wouldn't want that. So the CFR, the deep state, brings all these different players together: military, intelligence, big business, banking, big oil, even, all of them. And is working very strategically, and has been since 1921 when the CFR was created, and even before that, if you look at some of the other organizations, to bring about a one world political and economic system and to move us in that direction. And that's not speculation, Stephen. A lot of these people admit these things. If you go, for example, to David Rockefeller's autobiography, memoirs, published in, I think, 2012, he admits, he says he's proud that he's part of a secret cabal, those are his words, conspiring, again, that's his word, against the best interests of the United States, America last, which is exactly what we've seen, to bring about this one world political and economic structure. One world, if you will. Those are exactly his words, word for word, on page 405. This is a guy who led the Council on Foreign Relations for decades, along with his brothers and his family. It's a guy who funded the CFR. It's a guy who created the Trilateral Commission in partnership with Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter. So all these different interests coming together. And, each one has their own interest. The big companies want to make more money. They want to open up new markets. But ultimately, they're all moving in the same general direction. And it is essential that Donald Trump start dismantling these networks. He's already done some really significant damage to them. And I hope we'll see more of that in the years ahead.
Yeah, last week, they brought in PBS. They brought in NPR. Those people were very different in front of Congress than they are to their public family members and friends. But it seems like ever since USAID got shut down, all of a sudden the mainstream media started, having to do cuts and let people go. I don't know if there's any connection there, but I can see just from the data, viewership, retention, sponsorship, the number of 18 to 34 on the weekend, all those data points. It seems like Trump is breaking the mainstream media, or at least the left-leaning media. What are your thoughts on where the mainstream media might be by the end of the Trump administration?
Yeah, they are a dead man walking right now, Stephen. In fact, it's interesting. That was actually the subject of one of my most recent newsletters to our subscribers. The media is in a free fall, not just in terms of money, right? They're shedding jobs. They're having to cut back the salaries of their key people. They're losing market share dramatically. But even more importantly, for their long-term sustainability, their trust levels are absolutely in the toilet. Gallup had some recent numbers that showed that less than 1 in 3 Americans have trust in the media. I don't see how they recover from that. They are really in trouble. And by the way, this isn't just the national fake media, right? Yeah, we know the Washington Compost is now trying to reframe itself as like, we believe in freedom. We'll see how that turns out, but they have lost huge numbers of subscribers. CNN is cutting staff like you can't imagine. They're cutting back salaries. MSNBC chopping the payroll down. Associated Press has laid off, I think, almost 10% of its workers just recently. Now they're losing all these contracts and all these funding streams from the federal government through USAID and others, Politico. They're in huge trouble financially. But this goes all the way down to the local level, Stephen. Local newspapers have been in trouble for a long time. I actually think their business model is pretty outdated, but I believe they could thrive if they weren't constantly dishonest, right? People are tired of being lied to. And so what we've seen over the last few years, and this trend really started picking up in 2016, I think thanks largely to Donald Trump exposing all this, was the rise of a whole new type of media. And that includes major podcasters, people like you. It includes independent outlets. It includes outlets that now have an established track record of telling the truth. So you see companies like Your News now popping up to start breaking into the local news sector. And I think these things are going to continue. I think the mainstream media's model is dead, both the cable, the national newspapers, the magazines, and we're going to see dramatic transformations here because of the credibility. And I don't care how much advertising money Big Pharma has, this can't continue.
Well, speaking of that, RFK Jr. is looking to ban Big Pharma from advertising on TV, and specifically being the majority income stream for the mainstream media. We can't get anything truthful or unbiased. there's two major like monolithic groups that are just absolutely dying right now: the Democrat Party and the mainstream media. And wouldn't you know it, they're both leaning harder in the wrong direction. And then they're blaming Trump, they're blaming MAGA, they're blaming conservatives and Christianity, and it's just amazing. But what are your thoughts on RFK Jr.? Can he? So there's only two countries, America and New Zealand, that allow Big Pharma to advertise the way that they do. Do you see him being able to make that go away? And if he does, where do they go next? Because they're not going to go down without a fight.
You're absolutely right. They will not go down without a fight. And by the way, Big Pharma has some of the most powerful and expensive lobbyists in Washington, D.C. They spend more money than people could even begin to imagine. So they have a very incestuous partnership with the media that obviously colors their coverage in terms of downplaying risks or ignoring really important stories, in terms of hyping silly studies that are very easy to debunk. And then, of course, the incestuous relationship with government, where through a combination of mandates and subsidies and protection from liability, they're able to just rip off the American people, especially the middle class, through taxes, through mandates, things like this, to the tune of billions and over the long term, trillions of dollars. And if Robert F. Kennedy were to do something like that, bust up that incestuous relationship between big media and big pharma, it would be catastrophic for both partners in this relationship. Big pharma, by losing control of the narrative, would finally face some real public scrutiny. And the big media, as a result of losing, in many cases, the majority of its advertising dollars, would have to really make some substantial cuts. And I think probably would become slightly more honest in terms of their coverage. If you talk to mainstream media journalists who have left or even who are still there and want to speak off the record, what you'll find is that there's a huge taboo around mentioning anything controversial or negative toward Big Pharma. And the reason why, as Robert F. Kennedy has said over and over again, very obvious, the biggest source of ad revenue for a lot of these companies is actually the big pharmaceutical companies. So the fact that we're even talking about this right now, Stephen, is really significant progress. This was taboo to mention even just a few years ago. And I think the house of cards is falling down, and Robert F. Kennedy is the man to get the job done.
I hope so. Sticking with that theme of RFK Jr., I noticed that he has ordered a study on the safety and efficacy of vaccines, something that hasn't really been done. They've convinced us that it's been done. It's kind of the status quo. They've got a lot of people that will defend vaccines to the death, but they don't know anything about them. They don't understand the science. They don't understand the safety. So he's put that into place. RFK Jr. has also called for a comprehensive study of the chronic illness of Americans. Americans are the sickest people on the planet. He also wants to remove chemicals and ingredients from our food that Europe won't touch. He wants to do a comprehensive study on what is actually causing autism. This is interesting. Like 1 in 24 people is now autistic, but nobody wants to get to the bottom of it. And then I saw just recently, he announced he's cutting 18% of the staff of Health and Human Services, CDC, FDA, and elsewhere. Is Big Pharma going to allow this? Is his life in danger? Your thoughts?
I think it's very possible. And, RFK is one of those guys. He's not a Johnny come lately. He's been saying the same thing on these issues for years and years and years. I spoke to him a couple of years ago for half an hour about these things in a public conversation, and he was saying the same thing. Now, he's had to moderate a little bit what he's been saying because now he's in government. But they are absolutely terrified of him. We're talking not just massive amounts of money here, but massive amounts of power here that are at stake. And so the threat that Robert F. Kennedy poses to not just these particular special interests that we're talking about, but to the broader deep state that these special interests make up a critical part of is so huge that I think we could see very, very dramatic efforts to oust him. Look for fake scandals to be manufactured. Look for media hit pieces. And we're seeing them already. I mean, some of the headlines that we've seen just in the last few days are almost funny. You've got the mainstream media saying RFK hires anti-vaccine conspiracy theorists to research debunked. Like, this is not journalism, okay? This is activism masquerading as journalism from outlets that pretend like they're unbiased and independent. And so the unhinged nature of the screeching tells us everything we need to know about where the establishment is at on this. And they took out his uncle. They took out his dad. I would hate to see something like that. But of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not stupid. He's very aware of these things. And so I trust that he's taking all necessary and proper precautions.
I hope so. I believe he will play a large role. As he mentioned in his confirmation hearing, he said, I have prayed every morning for 20 years to have the platform to make America healthy again. And then when it looked like I was going to lose becoming president, President Trump stepped in and said, let's partner. Let's heal America. Let's make America healthy again. Like, I hope that goes down in history as like one of the coolest moments, because I think there's a real opportunity to change medicine for the better, change insurance for the better, make people more healthy. Losing weight can feel like an uphill battle, especially with the American diet. From nasty seed oils that hurt us to high fructose corn syrup that makes us even more hungry. Americans have wrecked their gut health. That's where Thermotrim steps in as a smart, science-backed solution. This USA-made fat burner starts by restoring your gut health. Thermotrim has a gut bacteria found in thinner people, but not heavier Americans. Thermotrim helps restore that so you can lose weight. It supports digestion and curbs cravings naturally. Have you tried other products to lose weight and change your gut health? I know I have. For me, Thermotrim is what my body needed. Get Thermotrim to improve your gut health and start losing weight today. Visit redlineremedies.com or snap the QR code. Make sure to use code Gardner to get an additional 20% off. We all feel better when we lose weight, and I want you to live a long and happy life.